Hi everyone, I'm back with another video. We just had a patch notes drop for patch 1.4.3, the mid-season update for season 4. And I already made a summary video about this. If you have not seen it, you should go check that out. I will also link the full patch notes down in the description. But there are some interesting things in there, including a pretty massive buff to the Andariel's Visage. Now, Andariel's is already a pretty good build for rogues, but there may be some other setups possible on other classes as well, thanks to this change here. So Andariel's Visage was previously mostly a puncture rogue build, pretty much melee playstyle, but with punctures. You kind of run into the pack and then you get the explosions around you. But now you can also trigger it at the enemy and not around the player. And this definitely opens up some extra synergies here. Now it doesn't necessarily like make it crazy more viable for some builds, but there are certain setups where I think you can kind of like slot in an Andariel's and just see what happens. For example, Windshear Druid already has a lot of the same synergies that would be required to make an Andariel's build function. But you also need to have a lot of attack speed, a lot of lucky hit, so you kind of want to build towards that as well. And on top of this, you want to have a good bunch of generic damage buffs in your setup, so that you can really benefit from this. And on top of this, Andariel's was buffed by 50% damage as well, which is kind of surprising to be honest, since the Andariel's rogue is already very powerful, and this will basically just make it into S tier, like no questions asked, I think. But that being said, I was trying to cook a little bit with Andariel's. So we know the Andariel rogue, and people are talking about potentially like Heartseeker Andariel instead of Puncture Andariel because now it's range and so on. Yeah, maybe that could be an option. I think Puncture will still win and the build will remain unchanged. But instead, I wanted to see what I can do with other classes. A little while ago, I made a Andariel's Druid that did not really work out too well. I thought that, you know, maybe with like lots of lucky hit triggers and the new landslide ring, maybe I could make something work. But the damage was ultimately not really worth it. However, here I tried to do something much more interesting, which is an Andariel's Sorcerer. And now you would think, well, and Sorcerer doesn't really have like synergies with poison, right? So it doesn't have like a tracker glyph or a bane glyph like the druids and the rogues do. But I figured, why not? You know, sorcerers have a lot of lucky hit, which is really important for this item. And we have a good bunch of generic damage buffs that you can actually apply here. We have a decent paragon node like Frigid Fate, for example, that kind of just works for everything. And well, we have stuff like Tarasha's Ring that is a generic damage buff. We have Stardust Sky's Ring that is a generic damage buff. We have a bunch of aspects that you can throw in there. We don't have to, you know, extra weapons, for example, from the rogue, but okay. But overall, I figured I just try to make something work and try to get as much lucky hit as possible into the setup. So this is what I want to present you here. I have not tested this yet. This might be an ultimately failed experiment, but I will definitely try to farm up a few items for this and see what this will do on Monday when the time comes. So the idea is we're playing a Chain Lightning Sorc and we have perma unstable currents. So this is possible with overflowing energy, a bunch of cooldown reduction on your items, and unstable currents cooldown reduction. So you kind of just crackle a little bit, reduce the cooldown, and there you go. Now I might try to maybe also swap this around, maybe Shatter, maybe even Virus Mastery, which right now works for all elemental types. So this might even buff the Andariels. I'm not 100% sure about that though. So there might be some options here, but overflowing energy, perma unstable currents, and then spam the hell out of Chain Lightning. This is just the 1-point Chain Lightning, and then as we have unstable currents, we're going to trigger more Chain Lightnings, we're going to trigger charged bolts, we get the damage reduction there, for example, some cool little perks, some random ball lightnings, and of course some lightning spears that can give you vulnerable and stun, and just, you know, a bit more hits all around, basically. So that's the premise of this build. And there is like more stuff here that I try to min-max a little bit, but basically I made the entire setup here with all of the items. Some generic passives that help us out here are, for example, Glass Cannon. This is a very powerful passive, so if you get this on your neck, you can get a lot of extra damage there. And Glass Cannon is also getting buffed. The downside of taking more damage is actually being reduced. So Glass Cannon is very nice now, and basically goes into every single Sorc build if you didn't already have it. And one of the few things that can also buff the Andariels. So it's a kind of a strange setup that I made, stacking a lot of lucky hit, and also, for example, not even having burning effects in the setup. You see here, there's no burning instinct board. We don't have firebolt, for example. Instead, we have like ridiculous amounts of chain lightnings. We also buffed this with the now buffed unbroken tether aspect that will have and like more chains now basically. So there will be an extra hit that will apply to the boss. So that's kind of cool. So this is very strong. And I expect that I'm going to see something like 2 to 4 Andariel procs per second with this setup. Now those Andariel procs compared to rogues will do less damage, I think, because rogues has a bit more synergies with this, but it seems to be more procs that I can produce on the rogue, which is interesting. So I'm kind of excited to see how this will play out, and Sorcs already have like a bit of a lower baseline when it comes to the power level of builds, outside of like the fireball shenanigans with perma flame shield and so on that people are doing, especially with Shatter. But if you compare this to, for example, like a Frozen Orb Sorc or so, the bar is not very high in order to beat this. So I will see what will happen once I actually get to play this setup, and I'll keep you guys updated. I spent like a good hour or so optimizing the Paragon board here, so you can go check this out and maybe have some other suggestions or some other ideas on how to make something like this work, or even other like Andariel's builds on other classes potentially. I might try something like this even on a Necro. Maybe I'll revisit a Druid again. Barbs, I mean, they have a lot of generic damage buffs, but they're also like so consumed by bleed builds basically and gushing wounds and all that, that I think that there's just not really enough potential really, at least to be anywhere close to other good barb builds. But who knows, maybe there's something. Either way, it's a pretty interesting item now certainly, and I think a lot of people are excited to try to make something work with this. So here's my take on the Sorc Andariel build. We'll see what will happen here. You can go check out the planner. I might tweak it a little bit over the next days or so, but I think I have found some relatively solid all-round working setup here that will maximize the potential of what this Andariels can do on the Sorc. There's some more stuff that I have in the pipeline, so I'm also been working on a bunch of other stuff here. You see a bunch of these other planners, Grenade Rogue and Poison Rogue and all that, and I've been actually cooking up some Twisting Blade stuff as well. So more stuff coming soon in more videos, so stay tuned for those. I'll be working on a bunch of planners throughout the weekend, preparing some builds, and then we'll see what happens on Monday. So I'll probably have a bunch of builds ready and just try them out back to back and see what happens. So I'm kind of excited for that. For now, hope you enjoyed this little intro here to the Andariel Sorc. Find the link in the description. Let me know what you think, and see you guys next time.